Hello, Americasters. I'm in freezing cold Memphis, and I'm trying not to slip on some icy pavements as I make my way back from Mississippi Boulevard, Christchurch, where I was watching the funeral for Tyre Nichols. All of his family were there, of course.
So, with all that in mind, let us now welcome Cheryl Dorsey, who is the author of Black and Blue, The Creation of a Social Advocate. It's the story of her experience as an African-American woman in the LAPD, the Los Angeles police. She also served on a unit, I think this is really interesting, a unit similar to the Scorpion unit. It was called the Crash Unit, one of these units that has a particular role. Her one was tasked with addressing gang-related crime in Los Angeles. Anyway, Cheryl, hello to you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Cheryl, thanks for joining us. It's great to be able to talk to you with your very specific life experience. Let me ask you first, have you watched the videos of the assault on Tyre Nichols?
I have.
And when you see them, I'm sure you were shocked. How did you feel looking at it?
Well, I wasn't shocked because I'm a realist and I understand police culture, and I've certainly witnessed these kinds of incidents occurring across these United States and all 18,000 of these police departments from time to time. And so what I felt first was really saddened and disappointed because I know that police officers are not taught and trained to behave that way. And I also knew that this was going to be a further black stain on the occupation where I spent over 2 decades of my life. As a mother of 4 young black men, I was tremendously saddened and heartbroken to see this grown man crying out for his mother, hoping someone would come and rescue him, to no avail.
I tell you what I find really difficult to understand looking at it is there's the brutality, the total lack of humanity about how they behave towards Tyre Nichols, but also there's what seems to be a great deal of incompetence. This whole thing, it seems, started to get out of control because they just didn't know what they were doing.
Well, certainly there's a tremendous level of incompetence, and it starts at the very top with Police Chief C.J. Davis. She created this unit in late 2021. She allowed this unit to come up with this aggressive name, Scorpion, and she then selects inexperienced officers, 5 of whom we know now have been proven and demonstrated liars. 3 of the 5 we know now had prior disciplinary issues. And so when you put young, inexperienced officers and you put them in an elite unit and you have them thinking that they're more important than they are, when you ignore complaints that come in from the community about this unit and officers on her department, then officers begin to believe that they're untouchable.
There has been some praise for Police Chief C.J. Davis after the fact about how she handled the aftermath of this. But at the same time, there have been calls for elite units like these in other cities and other states to be disbanded. You served in one yourself. When you have units who are tasked with aggressively going out and sometimes preemptively preventing crime, is it inevitable that sometimes you're going to end up with violent altercations like this?
It's possible, but these units serve a place on police departments. You have to staff them with officers who have the right temperament, officers who have certainly sufficient experience, compassion, humanity, relatability to the community that they're serving. And you also have to staff it with supervisors like myself who would be responsible for responding to calls knowing that there's a potential for a use of force incident. It would be my responsibility as a patrol sergeant to roll up and monitor my officers. And should they engage in a use of force incident, then it's my responsibility to manage it, to stop it if it's not reasonable and proportionate. And so while there's great praise for Chief Davis for having fired these first 5 swiftly, I don't feel the same way, and she really doesn't get many brownie points for me because she created this monster. She allowed this fire to smolder for over a year, and now that something has happened that's made national news, she's in damage control mode.
I'm fascinated by what you say because you bring up really, I mean, in a sense, one of the great issues that all of this reveals to us, and that is just how difficult it is to be a police officer in America. Did you ever use lethal force yourself? Were you ever in situations where you had to make very sudden decisions that could have resulted in death?
I would imagine that I probably was. I never engaged in any deadly use of force, and I like to think that I was relying on my training and who I am as an individual. I had made up my mind when I joined LAPD, even though there was a lot of consternation in my community with police officers and how they were treating people who look like me. But I had made up my mind when I joined that I would be sure that I would be fair and that I would treat everyone that I encountered the same way I would want a police officer to treat my son if they stopped him. And so having spent 20 years in an LAPD uniform working patrol, I know you do your job responsibly, ethically, with compassion and empathy. I know it can be done. I did it. I never shot anyone. I've been in fights. I've certainly had some close calls, but I never had to discharge my duty weapon.
Cheryl, you talk about being on the force as a black woman in LA. Every time there is an incident where an unarmed black person is killed on the streets in America, it raises the question of race. What is a little more unusual in this case in Memphis is that the 5 officers directly involved were all themselves black. What's your position on this? Do you think race was a factor in this incident?
Well, we understand that these police departments are predicated on white supremacy, and I think that there are police officers who buy into the system, who do what I call bleeding blue. And I understand police culture and camaraderie is a very important thing because it's quasi-military. And there's another term that, officers talk about, which is, does this person have my back? Can I trust them? And sometimes trust means, are you going to make sure that I go home safely at the end of the day, which is what it meant for me? Or it could mean if I engage in police misconduct, will you acquiesce, which is what we saw all of those officers who were on scene at the beating of Tyre Nichols do. And so when you have officers who buy into the system, I can take race completely out of the equation. And I refer to these officers as those who are just drunk with power.
What a lot of people have said to me in Memphis is that had Tyre Nichols been a white man, there is just no way the police would have beaten up on him so badly or thought that they could get away with it.
Well, I would have to say I agree with that to some extent, but it would also determine where this white man was pulled over, because I can tell you, having worked every part of the city of Los Angeles, the more affluent areas, as well as areas that they refer to as South Central Los Angeles, where there are more people of color, black and brown folks. I know that I have seen officers who in 1 month may be in South Central and are extra aggressive in the way that they comport themselves in the field. And the next month they're on the transfer list to a more affluent area. I'm working the more affluent area now. And I see these officers come over there and how they deal and interact with the community, because by and large, police officers know that white people who are well-connected are not going to put up with the foolishness that someone in a lower socioeconomic area will put up with, because black people, let's be honest, have just become accustomed to, if I go to the station and complain, nothing's going to be done, so they don't complain. But we've also seen examples. There are plenty of videos out there of male whites who are really into that whole Second Amendment thing, and they can act in a way that's very contrary. And folks who look like me know you better not do that when the police stop you. If you got a gun, you better not be talking about your Second Amendment right. You'll do it, but you'll only do it once. And so when we see officers like we did in the Tyre Nichols situation, it was never about noncompliance. It was never about getting him into custody. They were barking out commands. We know that now. 71 commands were given to Mr. Nichols in 13 minutes, but we never saw the officers make an attempt to put him in handcuffs.
Looking at the wider picture, you will have heard all the calls for not just police reform but legislative changes, and there is a bill in Congress in Washington, the George Floyd Policing Act, which would increase police accountability a bit, ban certain techniques like using chokeholds and that sort of thing. There's a political problem with getting it passed. Practically, if the law were to change, do you think that that would make a real difference on the ground?
It would make no difference. And you know, our politicians, our civil rights leaders who are pretending this is the silver bullet, understand that it would make no difference because police chiefs have tremendous autonomy and they decide what discipline, if any, is going to be meted out. It would do nothing to stop what happened to Tyree Nichols. There's always been a prohibition of using chokeholds on many departments. We've always had a duty to report. When you see misconduct being committed by an officer, your partner, having a national registry of officers who misbehave is laughable because it's not like these police chiefs don't know who the bad actors are. Do you think that Chief Davis doesn't know who the 5 officers were that she had on that Scorpion unit? Absolutely, she knows because she's disciplined at least 3 of them. What I propose and suggest here is that our other legislators look at what we have going on here in California. It's Senate Bill 2, which was proposed by one of our senators. And what that would do is it would decertify errant police officers, officers who engage in the kind of activity that we saw the Memphis 5 engage in. Because once you're decertified, that means you can no longer be a police officer. You could normally leave and retire. You could leave and resign before you're fired and then just move over to a neighboring agency and start working again. And so if you're decertified, you lose your certification, much like what you would need to drive a car. You can't legally drive a car without a license. You can't be a police officer without police officer standard and training certification.
Gosh, that's depressing and disheartening to hear, Cheryl, but your experience is tremendously valuable in telling us what's really going on out there and what any possible answers are about how to fix it. Thank you very much for joining us on Americast.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Cheryl. Good to talk to you. Thank you.
I appreciate you.
Wow, quite blown away by that.